All right, here we go on the first episode of the week right here, SEC football and beyond. It's Dan Matthews. He's Chris Landry as we look forward to talking a couple of programs that I think a lot of people are really excited to talk about today. Chris, since we parted last, there has been even more that's happened in SEC expansion. We'll cut into that a little bit today. There's also been a few other news and notes coming out of the conference and from around the college football landscape nationwide. Also, the pro football landscape that we're going to have to get into a little bit in the show today, but looking forward to getting through all of it with you.
Yeah, Dan, great to be with you, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. I was just thinking when we flip the calendar to August, it is on. Practices are starting around the country in a week in some cases, and for the week zero teams, UCLA, Hawaii, for example, it's get started a little sooner. Lots going on. Recruiting never stops. Everybody's going, and once you get the NFL training camps going, you know that the college practices are here. So we're going to have a lot of fun. We're wrapping up the Alabama, with Georgia breakdowns. We'll have the entire conference done, and then we'll really have some fun getting into the meat and potatoes of the games and a little bit more about these teams. And maybe we'll been on this show, I don't know, we'll do a little on-camera production. Maybe we'll just talk about some of the elite teams in the country and how they match up against the elite teams in the SEC. Maybe we'll break down those in the days and weeks to come.
Well, at least a couple of them are going to come up today because with us talking about Georgia and Alabama, those opening games of the season, you cannot talk about the rest of the season unless you talk about those first ones. So, of course, we are going to get into that. But as we always do here at the top of the show, Chris, before we get into first today, Alabama, then Georgia, let's start first with the headlines from around the SEC. LSU just continuing a strong effort in their class of 2022. This one, though, a 23. So Ed Orgeron working ahead. Amarion Miller, a wide receiver out of Louisiana, staying in state, at least for now, and picking the LSU Tigers.
Yeah, he's a well-built kid. He's 6'2", about 195. He's a good-looking kid. He was at their camp in June. I was actually saw him there. He's from North Caddo High School, and I think he's a little bit undervalued player. A lot of the out-of-the-state schools weren't really high on him. Arkansas was. No, West Virginia, Miami. He's a really good-looking player. I think his best football is ahead of him, and I think before it's said and done, a lot of folks are going to try to get in on him. But, he's right now had a great time at the camp and committed to LSU today.
Yeah, as Ed Orgeron, like we've said, after really that first full recruiting class that they had, Chris, there was a little bit of a question there. I believe they finished 12th that year, that I think people were kind of looking at Ed Orgeron and saying, we don't do that around here. You're not supposed to do that around here. Well, I thought that was supposed to be your strength.
Yeah, it is. And, sometimes I think the variable for LSU when they're not in that elite range is when the state is in a little bit of a down year. They recruit well out of state, but the one thing that's different, and look, I spent time as a recruiting coordinator there, and there was a day in my day where we didn't have the fence around the state. It wasn't the same way. You have to fight off Coach Bowden in Florida State, and Michigan would come down. Ironically, their athletic director at Michigan, that's everybody talks about, he's backing Jim Harbaugh. I recruited that guy. Ward Manuel's right from New Orleans. It's changed. Nick Saban came in. One of the things we talked about when he was considering the job, and I worked with Nick in Cleveland, was, look, if you can build a fence around that state, it is an elite state. And Nick did it, and I think Les did a good job recruiting, and Ed that's it. Ed is a recruiter. That's what he lives for. That's what he does. That's what makes him, successful. And the other parts of it they have to do the best with it.
Well, and really, too, like you said, Southern Louisiana, it's crucial for them. Up north as well, being able to get Shreveport, Bossier City, those areas up there, that's crucial. Then it's also really crucial for them to go west on I-20 and on I-10 to go to Houston in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area and be able to get players to go east in this case and play. And over the last few years, they've done a great job of going there. Jamal Adams is a name that comes to mind. Also to Caleb Von Chasson as well from the Houston area going to LSU and playing. And there's been plenty that have made the same decision. And then also, too, a guy from the area that we're going to mention right now, because Tennessee today also able to, or at least on Monday, yesterday, getting the days mixed up. That's the way it goes this time of year, but able to pick up Addison Nichols, an offensive lineman from Greater Atlanta Christian, a 4-star offensive lineman for Josh Heupel's group, the 13th commitment, according to 24/7 Sports, that has said yes to the Volunteers. Chris, we know more than anything right now, numbers is what Tennessee needs in terms of being able to build back up the depth.
Yeah, and some offensive linemen, and this kid's a really good one. He's got pretty good feet for a 320-pound kid, and I know North Carolina was very high on him. I know Ohio State really liked him. So to get a player of this caliber, that's what they need. We've had a few of those guys in that area kind of moved on, and even in the mid-state area that, Tennessee has to build back their image. This is where you want to come, and right now it's kind of not, and this may not seem like something of the past that would be a surprise, but to be able to beat out North Carolina and Ohio State for a kid that they should get is a good thing, and maybe not so much expected with where Tennessee has dropped off in the past few years.
Yeah, you touched on it too. I mean, the Carolinas are crucial for the Volunteers in order to be successful. When Philip Fulmer had it really going, the North Georgia area, Atlanta obviously being the anchor of that area, Chris, but it was even to Toccoa or even to Rome or any of those areas right there. He needed to be able to get players out of there. I mean, even, Chuck Smith, who left Athens and went up to play at Tennessee. I mean, there have been a lot of players that have left the state of Georgia and gone up to play at Tennessee. So that's something else that's going to be huge for Josh Heupel and his staff.
More than any state, and you live in a state in Georgia that, 30, 40 years ago was good recruiting. It's now elite. It's one of the elite. Tennessee, from the time that I was there when I worked for the Titans, Middle Tennessee, they call it middle. Nobody says Central Tennessee. Middle Tennessee.
Over to the Mid-South. Yeah, I heard it all.
It is unbelievable. That used to be, when Philip was there, you talked about it. They had to be a national recruiting program because there were not enough players in that state. And the majority of them were in Memphis. And Memphis is like a whole other state. I mean, you can get to D.C. from Knoxville in the same amount of time you can get to Memphis. And now the mid-state area is unbelievable. There are 37 families that move into Nashville every day.
I can see why.
All the players. And it's just, it's a great place. And, but what that does, it's a population boom. And look, we used to kind of joke that Nashville was the mini Atlanta. Well, that continues in the outskirts and the Brentwoods and the Franklins and all those areas, that it is just going to be, it's unbelievable. And the quality of the schools, the quality of the football programs, that is a positive sign. You want to talk about positives for Tennessee. The biggest thing is in-state. Now, if you can begin to put a fence around that state, it actually means something now, a lot more than it did 25 years ago.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, the Clausens come to mind, too. You had to go to Southern California to get guys like Casey and Rick Clausen, because Rick obviously ended up there, but then also to Arian Foster coming from San Diego, going out there as well. So you're right. I mean, Philip Fulmer had to be very creative during his time there. And you mentioned Memphis. I don't know why you had to do that. I'm getting hungry now. A little bit of Central barbecue sounds.
Some barbecue?
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, the dry rub is fine, but, it's also, too, just some good ribs. Those always, and shout out Martin's Barbecue there in Nashville. It's always my spot whenever I go to the city. That actually, another great segue there, Chris, because we're going to talk about Vanderbilt and junior running back Javion Marlowe leaving the program. I know for a coach like Clark Lee and the staff that they have there, I know that good buddy Barton Simmons is the general manager there, trying to be able to build up that program. And their tagline is "Come here and get developed." In this case, you want to have good players to develop.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And the Marlowe kid's a good kid. He was going to be running second at running back. So I'm disappointed for that. And look, this is not about I guess this season, but in this case it is. I think it's going to be interesting to see. The one thing that they seem to be doing is putting an emphasis on we're going to improve the facilities and put the money where their mouth. There's no issue with money at Vanderbilt. That they can do it. I mean, the Ingram family alone can just redo everything. They just don't emphasize that. And I've always felt like, look, you don't fire coaches and hold them accountable if you're not going to give them a chance. Vanderbilt's unique. We just talked about the mid-state area. This is the school there that it's tough to recruit to. Not only the academic standards, the difficulty, but you don't have the variety of curriculum that you have in other schools. It's like, a lot of, not everybody wants to go to pre-med. It's just not, it's just, you don't have a whole lot. So you got to have something to sell. You can sell the academics. You can sell the city. You've got to have some facilities to do that. You've got a guy that if you're willing to put into it, Clark would stay at Vanderbilt longer than most. If you pay them, you pay a staff, and they're hiring. They've got more staff than they've ever had, analysts and whatnot. You mentioned Barton and other guys. They're being creative. Look, Clark gets it. Clark knows it. He's selling it. I love his enthusiasm. He said it's the best job in the conference. I love the enthusiasm. For him, it is. That's all that matters.
Hey, if you believe it, say it. Why not?
Yeah, believe it, do it. And you know what? For him, that's great. Just, I don't want him to look like the last 15 coaches I've seen at Vanderbilt, that they come in excited and they have the deer in the headlight looks by year 6 saying, what in the bleep am I doing? I mean, literally hitting your head against the wall. Don't want to see that. And it's this conference, as we've talked about the past couple of weeks, it's only getting tougher. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, how Texas and Oklahoma are going to affect the conference in recruiting, the overall talent. Well, if you're a Vanderbilt, people say, well, is it good for Vanderbilt to have them in? It's good for everybody in the SEC, a lot more money. What are you going to do with it? Where are you going to put your resources? At Vanderbilt, you don't have to win big. Just go to bowl games. Just be competitive. That's what you got to do. If you go 0-11, you can't compete. It is without question, the most desired road trip for anybody
easily.
in the SEC.
Yeah.
They love the city, love to spend the weekend, and get tickets because nobody goes there locally. It's the darndest thing. It's incredible. You go to a Vanderbilt stadium and see a road game is like going to an NFL stadium and seeing the Steelers. Somehow they get 8,000 people in the stadium. I have no idea how they do it, but they do it.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. It is kind of like, for the longest time, it seemed like San Diego when the Chargers were there. That seemed like it was always the home game for the opposing fan base. The Bears came to town. The Packers came to town. The Cowboys, the Chiefs, whoever it was always a home game for them. And, you definitely want to be able to try to cut into that a little bit. Because, people can say, oh, I've been here from the beginning. Look, I don't necessarily know about being there from the beginning when the product is awful. There's just too many good things to do in Nashville and throughout the state of Tennessee than to watch bad football on Saturdays.
There's no question about that. Speaking of traveling, I got to give you this. Your Texas roots. Well, when I was in Houston and we announced, I don't know if you quite remember the years but so when I was there, Bud Adams announced that we were going to Nashville.
Right.
But we played the last year in Houston, and that was the worst because we had the Steelers, the Chiefs, everybody came in, and it was something. It was, the Astrodome loud. You can hear "You suck, Bud" from all the fans, and you could clearly see that it was in row H. You know what it was, but absolutely, that's what it's like at Vanderbilt on the road. At home, it's almost like a semi-road game. Got to change that. Got to give them a quaint, redo that stadium. 50,000. It's great. Support it. That's what they need, and I think that they'll bring a lot of the locals that are not that right now. It's not a Vanderbilt alum. You ain't going to the game. That's just the reality. You got to get some of those fringe people to want to go and say, "Hey, I want to watch Vanderbilt," because right now I want to watch fill in the blank, whoever the opponent is.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head, too, that Nashville is much like Atlanta, where you do have a lot of alums from neighboring schools, where you have a lot of Georgia alums there in Nashville. You have a lot of Tennessee, obviously, moving over from Knoxville after they graduate, but then also, too, you'll find Alabama alums in that town, Auburn, on down the line. It's a complete melting pot of the SEC there in that town. So I know that Clark Lee and his staff definitely want to cut into it real quick before we get into Alabama to start our breakdowns today, Chris, and that is The formality that is the SEC inviting both Texas and Oklahoma, and both Texas and Oklahoma saying, we're in 2025 legally. We'll see you.
Yeah, it's obviously it opens the doors. People say, well, in media, I know you've probably dealt with this all week. Well, are they going to be the 2025? Understand, you've got to write the legalities. The SEC, what do you expect the SEC to do and say, yeah, and we're coming to get them next year? You can't do that legally. When the contract is up, and when our contract is up, we're going to go. That is code for, and I don't know if you heard it today as we're taping the show, Bob Bowlesby changed, the Big 12 commissioner, changed his tune. It wasn't quite as vociferous about, he didn't threaten to sue anybody today, at least not before noon. And he made the statement that was somewhat ambiguous, but kind of indicated that he's ready to talk. This is going to now go to the next step of the negotiation when you get them in and when. And I would be surprised if they're not playing next year in the SEC. It's going to be interesting this year. To have this 2 more years, everybody has to move on with where they're going to go, including the Big 12, and I think that's kind of how it play out. But one thing I want to mention, I was looking at something. The SEC, if you look at the 4 and 5 star prospects, they get about like 45 to 48% of the 4 and 5 star prospects in the SEC. If you add Texas and Oklahoma over the past 7 years, it's take like 2015 to now, you throw them in the SEC, let's just pretend they've been there, it would be now closer to 54%. Think about that. Over half the 4 and 5 star prospects in this United States of America would now be headed to SEC schools. So this is going to be something to watch as we kind of grow it. That's the real life impact of where this conference is headed with the addition of those 2 schools.
Well, it's also, too, for what you just mentioned right there about the SEC and the critics of the SEC, it's top heavy. It's all these different types of things. The conference wins. And let's also pay close attention, I guess I should say, to the 3 days of the NFL draft. This just in. Every single year, it's the SEC, and then it's others behind them. So, there's a reason why Texas and Oklahoma wanted to join. I think also, too, Chris, just kind of before we get into Alabama, is that I really, truly believe that Texas and Oklahoma, it's a game of chicken right now with the Big 12. It's are you even going to exist? Because I'll tell you what, we're willing to allow you to exist and be the awkward people in the room because we don't need to go anywhere. We don't want to give you our money.
There's no question about it. It's and how you do it, those are semantics. There are ways you can do it, and there's to think that this hasn't been thought through. That's not how this works. They've got a plan and an idea, but you got to play the leverage game, and so both are going to say, as you said, the game of chicken. You know what? Fine, we'll play for 4 more years there. Fine, we'll have you play 4 more years, and neither one of them don't want any part of that. Yeah. But if you give up your leverage position in any negotiation, it's like people used to say all the time. And the thing I hated the most in working in pro job is doing contracts. And people always say, why does it take so long? Because deadlines create movements. Yeah. If the deadline is a month from now, you're not going to get the best offer from them. It just doesn't work that way. And it's just, deals can get done in a 20-minute conversation, but it may take 6 months to, get to that point. This is going to be a process. They're obviously going to play in the Big 12 this year. They'll figure it out in a time frame that's amenable to both. I think that the interesting thing to me is how does the Big 12 play it? Because does this hinder their ability to go out and add people or stay where they are or be rated? I think they are the ones that are in a vulnerable position because the SEC, it's just, they're coming. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I mean, and the other part of it, too, is Jay Harris, the president of OU. I think that very much after what he said on Friday, that he and Lincoln Riley, I mean, I haven't heard it from Lincoln Riley, but it's like, yeah, we'll allow for that awkward trophy presentation at Jerry World after we win the Big 12 championship for you to give us the conference champion trophy and then go from there. Because it's, again, like I said last Friday on the Chuck Oliver show when I hosted for Chuck, I said, this is all Bob Bowlesby's fault. He got fat and happy. He started to not necessarily believe that the relationship was in jeopardy. And all of a sudden, his partner in the relationship said, yeah, I'm going elsewhere to find my happiness. Like, this is not going to do it, because Texas and OU said, hey, we're the ones pulling the weight around here. We can go pull less weight and get more money. I want that. So remember what the Lost Odds said years ago, too. He said, we are the Joneses, and Texas still thinks they are.
Well, and, people will say things like, well, Texas, they're a bully and they get what they want. Yes, because they could. They were the Big 12, and to a lesser degree, Oklahoma. They ran the league. Why? Because they could. When you have the hammer, you usually use it in a negotiation. They're not in a leverage position here because the SEC will run it the way they see fit, and they have to become, they're gonna be, I don't have any doubt that the calls to the Birmingham office will probably come, but Texas is not in a leverage position once they get into the SEC. And the Big 12, they could do it, because if they didn't, they always had the threat of we'll leave, and that's why the Big 12 would always say, what else can we get you? Can we make you happy? It's just, that's the way it was. They did it because they could.
No doubt about it. Hey, if you're listening to us today or you're watching us on Twitch as well, but for those of you who take it in through the ears, through right here, catch all of our shows delivered right to your mobile device by subscribing to the Landry Football Podcast channel, wherever you get your podcasts as well. And you can catch all of our great shows like this one, SEC Football and Beyond, the National College Football shows, SEC, ACC, Alabama football coming up this week with our good buddy Ryan Fowler from Tide 100.9. And NFL fans, you can catch the Scout's Eye on pro football by signing up on our Falcons channel, the Dirty Birds Nest. All of this is possible through us, your great friends here at Podcast Park based out of Atlanta. So you have all of that coming your way. Chris, we've covered a lot even before we got to the meat and potatoes of today. So let's do it right now. I yield the floor to you. Tell us a little bit about the 2021 Alabama Crimson Tide, the defending national champion, Alabama Crimson Tide.
These numbers everyone knows, but let it sink in. 6 national championships in 12 years. Think about, and 6 and 14 since Nick's been there, but 6 in the last 12. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Think about that. Think about, since Nick has been at Alabama, 60 head coaching changes in the SEC. 6-0, he said. It's remember this. I wasn't alive when Oklahoma went on their run. Coach Wilkerson. It's been this is something that you love it if you're Alabama. You hate it if you don't. Whatever. It is something that you just doesn't come around. This is weird. This is unusual. This is going to be an interesting season in that coaching changes. Let's get to that. Well, they're going to make this shit. The message doesn't change. The one thing that working with Nick, I know that what he does with his coaches. You got a Bill O'Brien, Doug Marrone coming in, for example. They have to, because people always ask about this. Well, how are they going to have to learn a new system? No. Those coaches have to come in, and the way Alabama calls it, like how they identify things, Nick doesn't make everybody in the building, all the players, learn the new stuff. He makes the new coaches come in and learn that way. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't put wrinkles on what they do, but how they call it, it's a different language when you change it. He makes sure the language and the message doesn't change. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. With that said, I'm wondering how this team will play out. I know offensively they still want to throw it. I still think they have good receivers. More on that in a minute. But I think they may be a little bit more identified, perhaps, with their defense this year. Offensively, got a quarterback that can throw it, got a quarterback with good wheels. They've got some open positions on the offensive line, but I think they'll be really good. I think Doug Marrone will do a great job teaching the run game. He was instrumental, Doug was, in his stops in the NFL. Learned an awful lot, and Sean Payton, who I'm very close with, Sean credits him a lot with really opening up a lot of things in the running game in the NFL. This guy's a really good run game teacher. The running back position will be fine, but it's new names, as it always is. They're really, really talented. Replacing Devontae Smith, well, look, that's difficult, but there's a lot of talent. What is Bill O'Brien going to do? I think he's going to keep a lot of the Steve Sarkisian stuff, at least early. And then how much they do of that depends on how well they're able to execute that. Different quarterback. Mac Jones was very good in the pocket, making quick decisions. I think that Bryce is going to give them more of what Tua gave them. Boots, waggles, outside the pocket, make plays that way. Defensively, I think Pete Golding doesn't get enough credit and gets a little bit too much criticism. When I study them on tape, they get you out of the comfort zone really well. They force you into a lot of shifts and motions that you're not comfortable with. And if they get you off schedule, you're dead. It's done. If you look at their defense, they really you got to make them adjust late. The one team that's had a lot of success offensively against their defense is Ole Miss. And it's because they make, and Lane knows this, having worked there, he makes Alabama have to adjust late in the snap. That's very, very difficult to do. And so you can't communicate it. You're a little late communicated, so he out-tempos you. And that's why he gets them into a fast-paced game, because it's the only way Ole Miss can compete, right? And most teams that can't run it quite as well, Alabama can adjust pretty well as the game goes along. But, they do, you got to get formations, motions, the trade the tight end in mismatches. You have to create gaps. You've got to do a lot of that against them. Offensively, this team they scored a touchdown per 11 snaps last year. Every 11 snaps, it was a touchdown. It's the highest in the nation. 30% of Alabama's offense resulted in 10 yards or more last year. They averaged 29 points in the first half last year. Second half, they averaged 19 points because they're bleeding the clock. The offensive formations that they give you, they had 3 Heisman finalists last year. They played against all P5 schedule, yet they allowed one team within 2 touchdowns of them. One team. The offense averaged 45 points a game for 3 straight seasons. Okay, think about that for a second. The premier NFL pro-style grinded-out offense is now averaging 45 points a game. You think about it. Alabama shattered the record for consecutive games of scoring 35 points or more. And that was 24 straight. I think it was Oregon, rather, from like 11 and 12, 15 straight. 24 games in a row they've been able to do that. So those are, some really impressive things that they've done. It started when Kiffin got there, but it was because Saban wanted to identify with it. He saw the rules were going to be a certain way. So let's go about, adjusting to it. You can't beat them. We're going to figure out a way to beat you. So the offense loses 8 starters, replacing an offensive coordinator. I get all that, but there's still a lot of talent. The defense, the front 7, I think is going to be as good as it's been in a long time. I think LeBron Ray. I think DJ Dale is an underrated player. Mathis is an intriguing player, like Jordan Battle on the back end. I think it's a deep secondary. I think this may be a little bit more defensive oriented, but let me say this. When people look, Dan, at defenses, and they have to understand that in the modern game, you define good defenses differently. It's about getting off the field on third downs. It's about, in the red zone, forcing field goals. It's not about stopping folks. And if you're going to have a fast-paced offense, if you're scoring once every 11 snaps, do the math. Look how many more plays your defense is on the field. You can't help but give up more points. And if you play to your offensive strength, you got a problem. Now, Alabama has a 4-minute offense. A program like Oklahoma that's great on offense hasn't been as good. Can they take that next step? That's what makes Alabama the best of the best. They get the best talent. They develop it the best. They scheme the best. They have no letdown. There's none of the, well, they have that moment. You may be able to get a great quarterback or a great offense or a great something that will give them trouble for a series, for a quarter, for a half, maybe for the full 4 games. But under pressure, the fourth quarter program, how they finish is unbelievable. Think about it. They put people away in a way that we've not seen in a long time. And that, in a nutshell, is why they get, look at the players. I think Mechie is a blue-grade player. Evan Neal is. I think, I'm looking at everybody's red or blue through the entire roster. That's unusual. You have maybe 1 or 2 and maybe 4 reds on really good programs. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 reds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 blues. That's ungodly. And a lot of guys that recruit very well in names and numbers, the end result's not nearly as good.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And, you mentioned Evan Neal. I mean, I think I'm still watching that video of him doing the jump split or whatever you want to call that, that he did, where you're just like, a left tackle in college football is not supposed to be able to do that. I mean, you touched on it too, Chris, with all of the offensive production that they have, is people just ask the simple question, how is Nick Saban able to get this to this point? He's got great players. I mean, look, it's one of the things that when I will never forget it, when LSU was going to play against Georgia in the SEC championship game, Kirby Smart was being asked, because remember that season, Georgia had massive struggles offensively in terms of the vertical passing game. And they asked, hey, LSU's doing this. Why can't you do this? And he said, look at the players that they have. Partially, he was right. I think there's got to be a commitment to it, too, because, it wasn't just all of a sudden that LSU woke up one night and Ed Ogeron said, well, I've got Justin Jefferson. I've got Thaddeus Moss. I've got Jamar Chase. I think that it was you finally found the scheme that fit those guys, and you were able to use it and use it well. And for the questions, too, out there, I think that people have is Bill O'Brien. Is he going to continue this, or is he going to be stubborn? Bill O'Brien's going to do what he needs to do in order to make himself a attractive coaching prospect to everybody else in the land, because let's be honest here, he's at Alabama because of what got him to this point, and that was some terrible personnel decisions in the NFL. I think that probably, too, coming off the field and the FUs with the fans in Houston and really kind of how he alienated that fan base, it precipitated for him to need to go to Tuscaloosa and get into the rehabilitation program. But, before we get into the schedule here, Chris, the defense, how funny is it that for the last few years we've talked about offense in Tuscaloosa? I think the defense could be the side of the ball this year that people look at for Nick Saban and say, hey, it's back to the way that he's liked it in the past. But as we've heard him say, and I know that you've heard him say as well, that offense is what wins games now. I think that more – let me actually rephrase that. Not turning the football over, getting the football back for you defensively, and not screwing up on special teams, along with standout offense, is what wins games now.
Yeah, look, the big thing about the game that's changed over, in my time and others is the fact that the offensive rules are so favored, the rules rather favor the offense, that if you don't take advantage of it, I mean, you're leaving money on the table, so to speak. It's tougher. And look, the RPO, by definition, it's not illegal, but it is, because it's a run-pass option. It's you can't block that fourth downfield. But if it's a run-pass option, you don't know what it is.
A lot more of those rub routes, right? A lot more of those illegal picks, but not being flagged.
And Nick was adamant. Is that what we want a game to go? Is that what we want to do? Well, no, he doesn't. Well, he understands, though, that's the rules. We'll adjust to it, and we will be the best at it. How do we do that? We'll go out and find the guy. We'll bring the guy in. Brought in Lane, a lot of the concepts. But I don't know that people are aware of this, but Lane wasn't running this offense at USC. He was mandated by Nick, look, this is what I want to run. And remember, I always say, you don't hire a coach for a scheme. You hire a coach that can have an eclectic view of either side of the ball and multiply change his scheme. Because schemes don't win, because schemes evolve. And so your ability to say, okay, I'm going to modify that. And Lane went in, I'll take you back a few years, folks, when he got fired from USC, and it was he went and spent a little time in Tuscaloosa, and he spent a little time in the bowl game, and he was basically doing some research work, dissertation work, if you will. And his mandate was I want to run this, Nick. I want to run this. What can you do? And he put together a binder of how he would do it, and that's when he got the job. And because he said, this is what we're going to have to do because this is what the rules are. And now they've become, if you're looking at elite offenses, not only do have elite offenses, but look at the talent. 2 quarterbacks go in the first round. 4 receivers in the first round. They're not getting drafted. They're getting drafted in the first round and in droves in a way that we've not seen. I mean, the complete transformation is incredible. Just like it was when you started to see all the spreads. You had the Mark Barron type safeties. Then now you realize, we got to play all these spread. Got to have more corners that are playing stages. So the star position, which is the hybrid, is now the cover guy in the slot that can cover big slots, he can cover little slots, and the Mark Barron type guys who would play there now, he'd be playing linebacker.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
That.
Yeah, he took the words right out of my mouth. And that's the thing is now, I mean, even the inside linebackers, I'll take you back to a time, even the quote-unquote 3-4 sets, really for the most part, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not around anymore. It's nickel defense. So you're not having the Teddy Bruschi's and the Ted Johnsons, these massive, 6'5", 250, 260-pound guys. Guess where those guys are now? They're on the line. They're now 270, 280 pounds and being able to try to get after the quarterback or play the run. That's where those guys are. They're not playing that position anymore. Now you're looking at guys who, at most, probably about 235, 240. That might even be on the high side.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And, that they still build their defensive front, and they kind of do a lot of mush rush. They don't allow any gaps, and then they can bring some pressure off the edge, but they don't allow any lanes. In other words, they just make sure they build a wall where a lot of people, penetrate and make plays negatively. He wants you to do your job, create a wall and then create push, which is why a lot of the individual numbers are not quote-unquote flashy, but the defense is so good. It'll be interesting to see. Is it more of that? Do they win more 31-17 games than, the 50? Well, it depends. I mean, it's like, Ole Miss couldn't stop the run. They averaged 19 points in the second half. They could have – Ole Miss led the SEC in points in the second half. They averaged 21. Because they were in shootout games, they had to up-tempo. Throttling it down. Only one team was in 2 scores. Throttling it down, Alabama still averaged 19 points in the second half. Throttling it down, running 4-minute offense. It's as impressive about what they can do in the run game as much as they can spread it out throwing it.
Yeah, real quick here, too, because, you look at this schedule this season for them. Obviously, the game in Atlanta against Miami, that's one that a lot of people believe should be a win for Alabama. We're not going to do the win-loss thing here. The third week of the season, September the 18th at Florida, I think that's more of on Florida that they have to prove that they can win that game. But then you get into a little bit of a tough stretch here if you're Alabama, at least by most people's calculations, it'd be a tough stretch. The second, Ole Miss in town. A lot of people are going to be really high on Lane Kiffin and that offense this year, especially with Matt Corral back, Jerry and Ely, all of the names that are on that side of the ball for Ole Miss. People are going to be looking at that game the following week. Then you go to Texas A&M, which, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, this doesn't have a bearing on anything in terms of the outcome of the game, but I think that CBS already has that marked as their lone night game of the season. So we'll see if it pays off from that regard. But then November, it's always tough. I mean, where you've got LSU, and then you've got it bookmarked at the end with a trip to Jordan-Hare, which we'll see what Brian Harson's able to get out of the first year of him there on the Plains. But we've seen in the past, too, that that's been a tough trip for Alabama. And real quick, before we get to Georgia, too, and wrap this up talking about the Crimson Tide, Chris, I'm sure maybe I can make you laugh with this, or maybe I start a whole new topic, and that is, why do we continue to do Nick Saban's homework for him? Like, why do we continue to give them motivation where it's, you know, some of the people during the offseason, oh, that's a lot to replace on that offense and on that roster for Alabama. This just in, he gets the best players in the country. He's getting top recruiting classes year in and year out. What was it, 7 straight years of top recruiting classes? And it's that, along with coming off of the regular season prior to 2020, where they had lost 2 regular season games for the first time in over 10 years, of people starting to wonder, are things starting to crack in Tuscaloosa? And then, you know, you get as well, last year, I don't say this to make light of it, but Nick getting COVID, where I think he looked around and said, this is what retirement life would look like if I wasn't doing something on a Saturday? Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, no, he's highly motivated, and I think of all the things that he does, and you try to poke a hole into it, it just really can't, because I think the ability to make every team realize that, look, you, meaning 2021, haven't done anything. Okay, 20 was what those guys did. 19, this is you. Do you want to be the one that makes the standard drop? So what does that mean? It's, you know, living in that moment, you know, making every, you know, be where your feet are. All those things that basically say, just get better today doing what we ask you to do. And that's really the key to being able to get it to that, you know, consistent level to where they can continue to strive with that motivation to be the best every time out. Because it's, most people just don't see repeating. In the NFL, it's tough because you lose a lot of players. College, it's more motivation. I mean, guys, you lose a bunch of guys, they leave, go pro. Well, they do that. They leave all those guys. You know, last year you heard, well, they lost all those guys at LSU. Well, they did. Alabama loses them every year. There's never a doubt. Why? The message never changes, and the standard is what the head coach set. So coordinators, players can leave, but the trunk of the tree is there and rooted, and everybody else are the branches that make it work.
It's really remarkable. It truly is, because who would ever fault him for having I shudder for Alabama fans to even say this, a 9-3 season. If that happened, Chris, we'd be writing him off. We'd be saying it's over. This guy can't do it anymore. But it was close enough of losing 2 games in the regular season in 2019 that got everybody to be like, oh, God, things are really starting to change in Tuscaloosa. And then, boy, we corrected to make sure that we were wrong. All right, twitch.tv/Chris Landry Football, or follow Chris on Twitch over at LandryFootball.com. Follow us by clicking the heart button. And please join us in the chat room over here. We love to hear from you, because at the end of the show, we come to you. We answer your questions. Subscribe to our channel, Chris Landry Football. Great way of supporting what we do, and allows us to be the Chris Landry Football Insiders. This will always get you the Family of Football podcast on the Landry Football Network. That's NFL, college, SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, all coming your way over on the Twitch channel.
Streaming only on Peacock.
What do you know about Dr. Dunch?
He was charming, intelligent.
My patients mean everything to me.
Based on the unbelievable true story.
I can't make sense of it.
Dunch has 2 deaths that we know of. The state of Texas has executed people for less.
It's like he knew what he was supposed to do.
And he did the exact opposite.
Dr. Death, starring Joshua Jackson with Christian Slater and Alec Baldwin.
I am going to fix you.
All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
So we have talked about the Alabama Crimson Tide. Chris, it's only fair that we talk about the team that a lot of people think is going to be facing them at the end of the 2021 season in Atlanta, and that, of course, is the Georgia Bulldogs.
Well, very talented team, and I think a very, very sound program. And I know that is the frustration of their fan base, and certainly the fun poking jab by the fans of other fan bases. Well, they can't win the big game. They're not well coached. They get this, that, and the other. Yada yada yada. This program is really good. It's the program that looks the most like Alabama. When I look at them behind the curtain, I mean, how do they do things, structure, how they've got more analysts than Alabama, all the things that they do. I think there's been we talked about Nick Saban's evolving. One thing I'll remind folks, Kirby and Georgia's got a history of this. There's only one time they've hired a head coach to be their coach. That's Jim Donnan. Everybody else that they've hired has been an assistant coach. And Kirby's a great fit for Georgia. We all know that. He's an outstanding coach. He's done a great job putting together the infrastructure. And by the way, and I don't think this has to be the case, he happens to be a Georgia Bulldog. But he is still very young as a head coach. And I think he is learning. And I think he is evolving. And I think he was around a lot of the success and the reason for the success at Alabama, doing it the way that we discussed that Alabama used to do it. I think he has been tinkering, dipping his toe into trying to evolve and become more vertical passing. And I think that's been the plan for a while, and it just hadn't happened. Transfer quarterbacks, late moves. I think it's really thrown a monkey wrench into it. I think it's an interesting year for this, in that you've got a talented, consistent roster, but they're trying to figure out how to be elite. The defense is very simple with what they do schematically. They make good decisions and they execute well. They don't over-scheme you. They just play great technique. They're not very diverse. They're just very good in how they teach it. The defensive front is so tough to block. That's the deepest defensive front in the league, one of the best in the country, along with Clemson. They force you out of what you want to do, because they'll attack you, and they'll force you to have to take a running back or a tight end. It's tough to try to play this team. They execute so well, as I mentioned, and they've got such good talent on all three levels that they do a very good job of being able to stifle you. If you get him out of pace a little bit and you get a lead in the past, that's been their bugaboo. Their offensive, evaluating that side of the ball, they can get a little conservative. Why? Because they are not as comfortable with it. People say, oh, guy's too conservative. He'll never do. You become conservative when you're not as comfortable doing something. When you become comfortable, you begin more aggressive. They take high percentage passes. They'll run it a lot. They'll run play action pass. But for the most part, they've not been overly aggressive. I'm curious to see. The offense has to have more consistent playmakers. They've recruited that. They've got good receivers. I think that you're going to see them evolve and become better and better. They're trying to bring that vertical passing game in, modernize that offense. I think that's been something they've been tinkering with, but I think they feel they've got a quarterback, they've got a receiving core, they think they've got the protection to do it. I think they've seen recent success in talking with them to what LSU did and how they just kind of flipped with Joe Brady. Is Todd Monken going to be able to do that with enough time to implement that offense? I think those are all things that are going to be fun to watch. They're loaded in the running back room. There's got lots of speed at wide receiver despite the spring injuries and whatnot. So I want to see, Pickens and Smith, all those guys kind of develop and be healthy, play like they got a lot of talent there. I think they've got a good tight end, and I'm not talking about Eric Gilbert, who's going to play X receiver. I think they can run two tight end systems. I think they feel like they can If Eric Gilbert can do what he needs to do to stay on the field, they think they can do some, some Kyle Pitts type things with him. So we'll see how that plays out and how they utilize him. The offensive line is, I think, well coached, well trained. I think the quarterback position is a little bit better than it has been. The defense had its moments last year, of struggles. There's no doubt. But I like this defense as good as anybody in the country. I think, again, they're well coached. They got a good system. They've got a head coach as the defensive guy. They've got a coach, and Dan Lanning had some interest in the Kansas job. He's probably going to get a head coaching job. But they got Will Muschamp in waiting. Will's a big part of that's going to have, I think, a good voice in a lot of what they do, and maybe given some overseeing of advice. Talent-wise, much like Alabama, a lot of blue grade guys. Davis and Dean, really good on the offensive side. On the defensive side, they've got 3 guys on the offensive line in my book that are blue or red grades. I like Jackson. I like White. I like a lot of the backs. I think are all in the red grade areas, and I think JT Daniels is a team that I don't know that anybody can beat them in the regular season, with the possible exception of Clemson. I think they're gonna have to play down and mistake their way into a loss. Other than Clemson, Clemson can play with them and beat them. I don't think anybody else can beat them. I think it's Georgia stumbling. And so I don't know that they have to beat Clemson to get in the playoff picture, but I think if they do win, we could be looking at 12-0 versus 12-0, although that never seemingly happened in the SEC championship game. But we'll see. I just think this team is really good, but I don't buy in, Dan, of the talk about, well, if they don't win it this year, they'll never win it. That's such a BS. I always said, I heard this thing, Bobby Bowden can't win a big game. Tom Osborne can't win a big game. John Wooden couldn't win a big game for 11 years. I mean, I hear that all the time. If you're consistently good, it's coming. I think it's coming for Georgia. As long as, I talked about it a little bit earlier, I referenced Lincoln Riley, and he has to understand that being a head coach is more than just running his offense in a stylistic way that's pleasing. He's got to run a 4-minute offense and play to an improved defense. Kirby's got to be a little bit more balanced and play with a little bit more of an approach to where they've got a good 4-minute offense. They've got a great defense. They've got to become more efficient in the vertical passing game, in the 2-minute game, because if they get behind, that's the problem. And if you get behind 2 scores somehow in the second half, you start to press, they're not really that good. They're playing left-handed at that point. They've got to become more ambidextrous in their play. And he's got to work on the offensive part. That's what being a great head coach is. We just talked about Nick Saban. That's what Kirby Smart is hoping to be. To this point, he doesn't have the skins on the wall. But I'll tell you this, I've known Nick Saban forever. Nick had the experience at Toledo. He had experience at Michigan State. He's had experience at LSU. He's experience with the Dolphins. He had a lot more experience. Kirby's got to grow with it, or else he's going to get a lot of criticism if he doesn't win it this year. But I think they're super talented.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think, just kind of to look back on the last couple of years offensively for them, is that you've had the built-in excuses for them not being what people believe they could be this year. 2019, the receivers, you didn't have the talent. And if you did, you didn't necessarily believe and trust in that part of the offense over the running game and also the offensive line. Because that's what Kirby looked at with that team and said, we're going to be able to control the line of scrimmage as well as anybody in the country. And then defensively, I'm going to steal a line here from Manny Diaz when Chuck Oliver caught up with him at ACC Kickoff a couple of weeks ago, where he said, defensively, we got to eat our vegetables. We got to stop the run. Georgia loads up on their vegetables. They do that incredibly well. It reminds me really, Chris, of what the disconnect was for this team at the end of that 2019 season. I remembered here talking with Georgia fans before they took on Joe Burrow and LSU. They hadn't seen this defense. Do what? Stop the run? Okay, so maybe you limit Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That's fine, but you do two things, you don't do two things incredibly well that you need to do if you're going to beat Georgia, if you're going to beat LSU with strong defense that year. You got to get to the quarterback, They didn't do that. You got to get turnovers. They didn't really do that. I think those are two things defensively that Georgia has to improve upon this season. I will say this. I know that spring games can be a great fooling influence for you because you look at it and you say, it's a spring game. These guys know each other, so maybe there's a little bit of backing off. Maybe there's a little bit going more because you're trying to win a job. That defensive front, to your point, looked incredibly dominant in that spring game. Now, conversely, you had people who said, this offensive line, there's some questions to answer. Jamari Sawyer is a guy that they were moving around all day during G-Day. I was there that day at Sanford Stadium. I had a chance to see it. Him and Xavier Truss at left tackle, splitting some time. I think that probably the spot for Sawyer on the offensive line is probably left guard. The question that normally would be there, and in the one game that you gave him on the offensive line, Warren Erickson against Cincinnati in the bowl game, played pretty well. And he was taking over for a pretty good player there at the center spot. Georgia's had good centers. I think the good news is for them in that regard, where you've got probably McClendon at right tackle, you got Justin Schaefer at the right guard spot. Likely for Georgia this year. But the good thing they're going to be able to do, and I'll throw it back to you before we get into the schedule a little bit, because I've got a couple of notes on that as well, is that in the past it had been if you lost very good players on either side of the ball on the lines, you had to worry about the depth and you had to worry about how exactly are we going to replace that. In some cases, you didn't replace it. When they lost David Andrews, they didn't have an answer at the center spot for quite some time. You were able to get some good play out of Brandon Cublano, but he was undersized. He was not what you needed from that spot. And then eventually you got the play that you needed up front there. And it's the offensive line started to create that identity of them looking around saying, we can be physical. We can bully people. As a matter of fact, we are going to do that. Now I think you're going to be asking a little bit different from them. Like you said, with the offensive passing game, you didn't necessarily have the time to build it up last year too. No spring. No real summer workouts, no real fall camp. And then on top of it, the guy that you were going to go with into the season because JT Daniels wasn't ready, he wasn't ready. And then you had to rely on a walk-on quarterback in Stetson Bennett. And when people thought going into that game at Alabama, this is going to be a great story. For who?
Yeah, there's no question. And I think one of the things I'm a big believer in cross-training on the offensive line in the secondary in particular, so that you've got to prepare for injuries. And I think that they've got a lot of talent, but I think it's important. So left tackle goes down, what's the best option? It's not necessarily the backup left tackle. Maybe the right tackle, can he play in another stand? Those are the type of things that you've got to work through, really spring and this time. Look, there's no question that they've recruited well. They're deep enough into the system. And then you've got to deal with situational football. And it's one thing I think that's valid in the criticism of game day. Boy, they were very slow. You mentioned the LSU game. How about last year? Couldn't cover the swing route out against Florida. It just ate them up. Not being able to adjust to that. And that game goes offensive. What can't they do? They can't play that tempo game. To use the basketball analogy, they can't go fast break up tempo. So how do you deal with it? Well, you've got to become. You got to have all the tools in your toolbox. You may not need to pull them all out in a certain game, but if you're going to get in, you can't stop the swing route, you can't make the adjustment, then you better get on your horse and score against that defense and win a shootout game. Well, they haven't been able to do that. They win their way, and that's good, but there's a limit. There's a ceiling to that. Just like I said, there's a defensive limit to Oklahoma. There's not a limit to the elite teams, and Clemson has been elite at times. We know Alabama's been elite. Everybody's chasing that. So Georgia's fine, Georgia fans and critics. They're fine. You want to say they're not Alabama? Hello, no one is. Yeah. If you're talking, and I know they don't have the title. I know Ryan Day goes another year or two and doesn't win a title. They're going to say, well, what has he done?
Yeah, beating Michigan. You think that's good enough around here?
Yeah, no, and then the only difference is Kirby's been there longer. But I still think that Georgia is the best program in the East, the best infrastructure, and I think they're the team to beat. But I thought Dan did a really good job against them last year, and we'll see how they respond.
Yeah, I mean, in no way would Kirby ever be on the hot seat short of just a complete collapse of a season, which with this roster I don't see happening. But I will say this. It's going to be very important for him to be able to combat scenario number 2 if it comes to that this year. And that is the very first game, September the 4th in Charlotte, Chris, against Clemson. I'll give you the pie in the sky. Scenario number 1, you come out of that game with a win. Kirk Herbstreit's on SportsCenter with SVP afterwards, up in the booth, talking about it, and he's saying this Georgia team is for real. They've got the quarterback. They've got the defense. They've got the talent. Watch out, college football. This Georgia team, it might finally be time for Kirby Smart and the Dogs. If they lose that game, there's another part of the scenario that Kirby's going to have to battle, which it's going to be the same old scenario. Same old Georgia, can't win. You're going to start seeing the graphics on the opinion shows of him and Mark Richt throughout the first few years. And it's, oh, hey, look at him and Mark Richt. There's not much difference there. And then it's also, too, you're now entering into the high wire act that is college football, especially in the SEC, which the good news is for the rest of the year, no LSU on your schedule, at least until maybe if you face them in the SEC championship game. Same deal with Alabama. You have the crossover with Auburn, but you're a better program than Auburn is right now. You've got Arkansas coming to you. So not all is lost if you're Kirby Smart and you lose that game, because it's going to be tough for the first few weeks if you do start off 0-1 to be able to come out of that corner of people, same old Georgia, all this different types of stuff, because, yes, you absolutely want to have that safety net with this schedule this year and have a chance, like you even pointed out, for the opportunity to maybe go to Atlanta 12-0 against 12-0 maybe. I mean, if you have that and you play against Alabama and say you aren't able to get over that huge mountain that's been in front of you for the last few years, because that's the thing, too, is Georgia fans, I talk about it all the time with them. They're the 2004 Red Sox right now. Remember, Chris, that's the thing, is the curse was broken, all of those different types of things. But don't you think that Red Sox fans, it was that much sweeter because they beat the big bad Yankees and finally got over that part of it? Whereas for Georgia, if they win a national title, that's still going to be special. But isn't it going to be that much more special if on the way there they finally said, you SOBs in Tuscaloosa, we told you we could beat you, and we finally did it?
Well, and here's real simple. If you lose to Clemson, you got to beat Alabama. You got to win in the rest of your games. Then you got to beat Alabama to get in the playoffs. If you beat Clemson, we don't know how the rest of the thing will play out, but there's a possibility that you could lose that game, still get into the playoffs. Don't know. No way we can start figuring that stuff out now. But I think that game is, look, it's not the be-all, end-all, but it is really important and just going to be a whole lot of fun to watch. That's for darn sure.
All right, so we'll get to the mailbag questions here to close out the show here on a Tuesday for you, as we always appreciate every single one of you watching us on Twitch, listening to us as well on the Landry Football Podcast channel. Also, too, don't forget to join Chris and the great crew. Landry Football, LandryFootball.com. All things football from the coaching, scouting, administrative perspective. High school, college, pro, player evaluations, as you just heard Chris give you on the show today, talking about Alabama and Georgia. Coaching, draft, recruiting, games, one-stop shopping football. I'm a subscriber. Chuck's a subscriber. Everybody should be a subscriber if you're a football fan. The Twitch shows, like we threw it out there as well. You can also follow Chris and the crew over at Landry Football on Twitter, at Landry Football. Chris, something, too, that came to my attention as, saw as we did the SEC notes earlier. I did not see this earlier, but it is massive news, and I'm sure you probably saw it as well, where Miles Brennan apparently at LSU practice. I'm not sure if it was at LSU practice, but as they are getting ready for fall camp to start at the end of this week over in Baton Rouge, left arm injury, surgery required, timeline for return unknown at this point. That's what we know.
Yeah, I did. In fact, it was good thing I remember to put the phone on the silent. Sometimes I mix that, but yeah, I kind of a little bit distracting to see it, and it's disturbing and it's frustrating. It's just heartbreaking, this game is not it's not fair. It's the injury factor is something that you can't get away from. It's a young man that's worked really hard to get back. So I'm crushed. Really am crushed for him. So very tough news, and we'll have more details about what's happened. And he just, again, it's not a fair game. That's for sure. Just really, really tough to see that happen to that young man. And I don't know enough of the details yet. We will, and we'll certainly be able to talk about it, I know, on the Thursday live taping of the Friday drop SEC football and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, incredibly unfortunate because I think for a lot of what happened last year, look, I'm one of the people who, after the way that Max Johnson played at the end of last season, Chris, said that's his job. He's got to have that job. But then I kind of stop and think about it. I'm like, Miles Brennan didn't do anything to lose that job. As a matter of fact, you would say he did everything to keep that job, even with the opportunity coming back from the abdominal injury that he had last year. And here's the thing, too, that I said was going to be the case coming back from that injury last year. You're telling me that offensive, defensive linemen, the guys at the toughest positions on that team, Chris, weren't going to look at that guy and say, he's tough. I can get behind that guy. He's tough.
Yeah, no question about it. No, it's really, really tough. And it's emotional. It's emotional for teammates. It's a family. And you see a guy go through all that to fight back and to have this happen again, it's very, very difficult. And I always look at it as a coach. Now you're sitting there, okay, because your backup quarterback's one snap away from being your starter. So now, Garrett Nussmeier, we like him. Well, he better be ready now.
Yeah.
Now he's going to get he's going to get the reps when they kick it off. And, it's not something we thought. We thought we had, LSU would have a veteran guy, and Max is, probably can make more plays, but Miles knows the offense really well, and they've got playmakers. They've got a couple of options now. One of the options gone, and it's about getting Nussmeier ready to go because you got to get number 2 ready to be your number 1 in a moment's notice, and that's not as easy, particularly for a younger guy that to this point hadn't had as many snaps. Hard to get 3 guys ready to go. Neil, in fact, it's impossible.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things, too, that people always say, oh, stay ready, stay ready, stay ready. It's easier said than done, Chris. I mean, because I think that you're exactly right. Garrett Nussmeier came in there with saying, hey, you know what? I want to get a good opportunity to be able to get some meaningful snaps this year. But now, I mean, he's going to be getting them early in the season. I mean, I don't know how long, again, Miles Brennan's going to be out. But, I mean, that game, and I know that you and Neil had broke down the schedule, but McNeese State, Central Michigan. I mean, games like that early on in the year, you would expect that Garrett Nussmeier now is going to be getting some playing time. So, again, we'll figure out how long the LSU Tigers are going to be without Miles Brennan. For him personally, that's tough. That's tough. All right, so let's close it out with this before we get to the mailbag questions. Again, too, everybody on the Twitch channel, please feel free to jump in there with your questions. I see a couple of them in there. We will get to them here in just a couple of minutes. But let's start first with a couple of college football bits of news, Chris. One of them, the news out of the state of Texas. It was teased last week in a story by Yahoo Sports that Southlake Carroll quarterback Quinn Ewers was leaning towards leaving high school early, reclassifying, and going up to Columbus and starting his time with the Ohio State Buckeyes on Monday. That was confirmed by him on Twitter. He is indeed going to do that. Now, the emphasis for all of this as well is his trademark, the mullet, all that different types of stuff, Chris. He was starting to get NIL attention, and he looked at it and said, why not go ahead and start that clock now and at least be in the classroom there, be on the practice field, and be able to see how things shake out in Columbus. And, oh, by the way, be able to make some money, too.
Yeah, I think that's obviously the latter part is the key is you got a chance to make money. Can't do it in high school. State high school regulations there, and I don't know that there's a state that would allow it, but so you're going to see that. Now, how often you're going to see it, you know this, Dan, how many guys can command that? So if you're looking at a guy that's maybe we'll use this vernacular, I don't grade him this way, but all right, so let's say it's 2-3 star guy. Well, he may not, he doesn't, the NIL may not be available to him, and B, does he have all the offers? So I don't know that but I will say that there's a good possibility that a lot of these highly rated guys may want to do this. But you also have to have your academics in order, can do it. A lot of things need to fall into place. Here's what I'd say. It annoys me, just the coach comes out at me, that when people say, well, he doesn't have to play high school football his senior year. He's already got the scholarship. He doesn't have to play his senior year in college. He's already going to be a first-round draft pick. Your development is hurt to some degree. And so it's not that he can't achieve what he wants to achieve, but he's going to miss his entire senior year in high school, which from a development standpoint, hurts him. Football development. It's not going to hurt him in terms of, it doesn't mean it means it can't be successful. He's behind some good folks. He's not going to be a factor this year. Now, make it a positive. Go in, work hard, be around the football program, learn how you do things. But I don't know that this is something that I would recommend. I think playing football is really important. But the almighty dollar, as it always does, if you can command that type of money and you can't get it at this level and you take care of your academics and you can enroll early, even earlier, a lot of folks are not going to turn that down. I know that.
Well, just a couple of things from this as well is, number one, by the way, you're right about his development, because some people might say, well, what about the coaching? He's got really good coaching at South Lake Carroll. Riley Dodge, who was, of course, his dad, Todd Dodge, who, by the way, is still a good coach in the state of Texas and is now coaching with Quinn Ewers going on to the next level. According to 24/7 Sports, the number one quarterback in the country in terms of high school prospects coming out, and Cade Klubnik out of Austin Westlake High School there of deciding to go to Clemson after his high school days are done. But Riley Dodge, a very good coach, so he still would have been getting good coaching there going into this final season. And I think the other part of this as well is, really quick before we move on to our final college note before we get to the NFL, is that I think that with things like this, it becomes a status symbol. And it reminds me a little bit of the I'm opting out of the bowl game. I'm good enough to not have to play in this bowl game. That's what it is, because I could use the COVID example. COVID, it was personal decisions that had to be made. I get that. That's why I'm not going this route with it in terms of the decision that was made. But let's look at a guy like Jamie Newman, who made the decision to not play last year and made the decision to try to let it ride. And then he went to the Senior Bowl, played terribly at the Senior Bowl, did not look good during the practices, did not look good during the game. That hurt him when it came to draft prospects. So I think that what I'm really getting at, more of just using that as an overarching example, is that just because the money might be there for some players, you really need to hope that a lot of these kids have a good support system and enough smart people around them to say, hey, if the money's there, it's kind of like what we see in Major League Baseball, the draft, Chris, where if kids are getting life-altering money coming out of high school, don't you dare step onto a college campus, especially if you're a pitcher. Don't you dare step onto a college campus, pick up a baseball, and start that 3-year time window that you have at least until you can come around to the draft again. So if that's coming your way, then sure. If Quinn Ewers feels like that's coming his way right now, go for it. But yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of kids out there that are teased with this of, ooh, I'm being offered $20,000 to do this. Is $10,000 or $20,000 worth possibly throwing your career arc off to a certain direction when it could have gone another direction? I don't mean to go Mr. Destiny on everybody here, but I mean, it's something that I think a lot of these kids are going to have to weigh. And for, 17, 18 years old, that's a tough decision to make.
Yeah, no, I think the individual name, image, and likeness viability is going to be directly correlated to how well you are as a football player and how developed you are. I think eventually my thoughts have always been that we're going to have a lot of programs that are make sure that money is funneled to everybody on the roster. But is it enough for guys other than the elite guys to come out early? I don't know. So much of this we don't know, and we're going to say, wow, watch this. Look at this. This we didn't. Well, unintended consequences, things that we thought might happen, but we weren't sure. We're in a new world. Things are changing, and like it or not, it's upon us.
All right, so let's move on to our final national college football note that we have here, and that is defensive back Jaheim Singletary decommitting from Ohio State. The Jacksonville product is back out there, Chris. A lot of people believing that there is a chance that Kirby Smart and Georgia might be able to sneak in and bring in a very good player.
Yeah, he's really, really talented guy. He's got some growth room, too. I think he can be one of those big cover guys that, very, very effective in press man coverage. He had a great visit over at Miami. I talked about T-Rob, Tavarius Robinson. He's got a good relationship with him. He's visited Florida. But Georgia is a team to watch. There's no question about it. Will Muschamp, who was recruiting him, along with T-Rob, in his early days. So they've known about him for a while, and so they've got great background rapport with him. I think with this happens a lot. This is a kid, as you mentioned, from Jacksonville. And Ohio State's great. You go, and it's great, and it's fun, and it sounds good. The closer it gets towards the time, you realize, are there options closer to home? Can I get everything I could get over there and get it closer?
Right.
It's one thing to say, and I think this is what's happening here. We'll see how it plays out. We got to December, but I think Georgia's in the best shape of anybody based upon the fact that it's the best program recruiting him that's got a good, strong relationship. I think Florida is a great program, too, and Miami's good, but Florida in particular. I don't know if there's that built-in trust relationship on the Florida staff that there is with Georgia, but who knows? You never know in recruiting.
Yeah, Jemiah Adai is the primary recruiter, at least according to 24/7 Sports. So we'll see if Georgia is able to add to an always, year in and year out, strong recruiting classes that Kirby Smart and his staff are able to pull in. A couple of NFL notes here, as this is SEC football and beyond. So, of course, this is the beyond part, along with the National College Football notes that we just went through. But Carson Wentz, injured. I know a lot of people saying, yeah, what a surprise. 5 to 12 weeks, Chris, according to reports, on that foot. Going to have it surgically operated on. Jacob Eason right now, likely the starter, according to Frank Reich.
Well, on the roster, I don't believe the guy starting for the Colts this year is on the roster. I think they're going to make a move, probably, and again, you lose, talking about leverage, you use leverage position, but I would think they're going to make a run at somebody like Nick Foles. I don't think the Jacob or Brett Hundley or Sam Ellinger or any of those guys I don't think any of them are going to be their starter at the start of the season. Tough break. Pardon the pun, but I think they're going shopping, and we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think right now, in camp, you get Jacob, go at it, see, make them change their mind. You can go and trade for somebody, do something. I think you need to do that anyway because you got to have a pretty good team. Hey, go win it, Jacob, and be better than anybody we bring in. That's what we hope. I don't know that hope is not a strategy. So have a dual plan. Go get somebody that you can turn to and, coach this guy up so that maybe he can be the guy, and we'll go from there.
And finally here, too, another NFL note. The Buffalo Bills, maybe, Chris, in the future known as the Austin Bills. Bills Mafia is saying, say it ain't so, man. Western New York cannot lose the Buffalo Bills, but we see this time and time again that whenever there is posturing for a stadium, it's always, well, if you guys don't want to pony up the money for us to stay here and move out of this stadium, there's other people who are willing to do it. You've talked about it. You were even part of it, going from Houston to Tennessee when the Oilers moved.
Yeah, and I was, Cleveland for a while before they went to Baltimore. So I promise I didn't have anything to do with it, but just bad luck, I guess. I don't think it's strictly leverage play. I don't know. We always thought that the leverage play will always be north of Toronto because there's about I hadn't checked in a while. I think there's about 8,000 or 10,000 season ticket holders that come down from Toronto for every Buffalo game. There's a big contingent there. Look, the Pagulas are going to put up money there, but again, they're going to try to squeeze as much money out of the local and the state to help them to fund this. I don't see them leaving Western New York. Definitely don't see them in Austin. That's the thing about it is, there'd be another play there if there was legs to it. I don't see any legs to this at all, other than a leverage play that I'm not sure anybody's buying.
Well,
and by the way, if they really were in love with Austin, I can tell you they ain't moving. the one thing, Jerry Jones may not be big in terms of being able to make decisions in football-wise. He has got a lot of power. There's no chance in hell, pardon the French, that anybody's moving to Austin or anywhere near it. They ain't moving to San Antonio. They ain't moving to El Paso. They ain't moving to anywhere in Texas because Jerry is very, very powerful and big into that part of it. I've seen him work in owners' meetings on that. He's good at that now. He's not maybe good at some of the other things that he likes to be known for. He is really good at that. That ain't happening, I can tell you that.
I will tell you, too, from my experience living in the state of Texas, that Sundays in Texas, Austin, San Antonio, that I-35 corridor right there, it's silver and blue for the Cowboys, very much. I mean, the local TV markets there in large cities, too, Austin and San Antonio, Chris, they treat it like the Cowboys are their local team. Their sports directors are on the field doing stand-ups from AT&T Stadium or, MetLife or wherever they are around the country as, this is now Cowboys Tonight here on the Fox affiliate there in Austin. Or whatever the CBS
we had
is
training
in San Antonio.
camp in San Antonio all those years.
Yeah.
And with the Oilers, and it was a Cowboys town. I mean, it was very little presence because we had, training in Trinity and great place. It's definitely Cowboys country. You are absolutely right.
Yeah, Alamo Stadium. I always heard about those training camps there in the old days of the Oilers. So let's get to the mailbag here really quick. Nola Jack is, we just got off the NFL topic. I guess he wants to get in here with John Johnson. How huge a loss is that for the LA Rams? How huge an addition is that for him to go to the Cleveland Browns?
I think it's not a significant loss, but it's a loss, and I think it'll be positive. In fact, I'll get into that and a couple of other things scheduled on the Scouts Eye podcast. Nola Jack, I know, being a big NFL fan, you're going to want to make sure that you sign up for that. So make sure you do that. If you didn't hear, you can go to the Falcons channel, the Dirty Bird's Nest, and sign up. So make sure you get that. But yeah, I think it'll help. I don't think it's a overly significant move, but I think it can absolutely help the Cleveland Browns and hurt the Rams a little bit less than it'll help the Browns, if that makes any sense.
This from Woodshed King. Chris, how do you think Bill O'Brien and Doug Marrone would fit together in these roles with a different head coach? Obviously won't be problems working with Nick Saban.
Well, Bill and Doug will work well together because they work together at Georgia Tech. They're good friends and they see things very, very well. Now, if you're just for an example, and we just talked about a little bit and alluded to it in some of the LSU discussion, Ed, great recruiter, but he's been hit and miss with assistant coaching hires, right? Well, the reason is Ed's, when they make an assistant coaching move at LSU, the message changes. Coordinator comes in, calls it his own way. Last year, Bo Pelini was an example of that. Matt Canada a few years ago. Linehan to a lesser extent last year on offense. Got to blow out those guys. And the message changes. Everybody's confused. It's chaotic because you don't have a head coach that's a real strong football-centric guy. So if you took a Bill O'Brien and Doug Marrone and they were put into a situation where they were quote-unquote, and even in the case of LSU, we're told, Bo was, Matt Canada was, that you run it, we'll deal with the head coach, the administration. That's a disaster waiting to happen. If they were in that situation and had the control, sometimes that could rub people the wrong way. Look, assistant coaches respect the authority of the head coach, but if that head coach is not really good and they don't have a lot of respect to the football acumen, it's not the same thing as one guy going into the room and saying, I don't like what we're doing on offense or defense, whatever the case may be. And, the way it happens, Coach, this side of this stuff, Coach, how would you like to run it? Well, if you're answering, I don't know, but this ain't working, you got no respect there. Well, what the bleep do you want? Then I'm going to run it the way I think that. Tell me you don't like it. I can try something different. You've got to, as a head coach, be able to go in and say, that not what I want. This is what I want and how it needs to be done. And if you don't have that type of football acumen, it's a problem. So, to answer your question in a long-winded way, it depends upon what coach it was and what type of respect and authority that guy has. I mean, look, did you watch Dabo Swinney in the bowl game when Tony Elliott was out with COVID in the not the bowl game, the playoff game?
Yeah.
I mean, Dabo, God love him, he's out there with the play sheet like, he was looking at a Chinese menu. I mean, like he was trying to decide whether it was going with the mushu pork or sweet and sour chicken. He had no clue. It's part of why they were disheveled in that game, too. Because Dabo's never been a play caller. That's not what he does. Oh, we'll run the same. Yeah, you run the same offense, but you don't have, and it's not as bad when you just have the play call because at least you've got the installs. But the knack of knowing how to set up plays and all that, you'll lose that art. So, yeah, you can't fool guys in the assistant coaching room. You can go into a press conference, I hate to say it, fool a lot of media and the fans about what you know and, well, we ran this coverage and we did that and not really know. The coaches sometimes they'll snicker. Assistants will say, you didn't have a bleeping clue about what we were trying to run. So it does have an effect. And that's why I think if your head coach is not the most respected and best football coach in the room, I think it can be a problem. And people say, just hire him for recruiting, hire him for this. It doesn't come off that way. It's a hit or miss, and there's rarely any consistency to it, and that's a problem.
All right, one final one before we get out of here again from Woodshed King. As if we didn't get to you this time, we'll get to you next time. But Jordan Davis, potential to be a dominant player in the NFL. How do you see him fitting?
I don't know about dominant. I think he can be really good. I think he's got the ability, got the explosiveness athletically to be really good on the next level. Time situation is certainly going to be key for him as it is in other of those cases.
As I just saw Kev Bolargo get in.
Yes.
Bolargo.
Kev's a good friend, yes.
Yeah, there
yes.
we go. 33,770. Chris, interested in which programs are investing in NIL infrastructure to boost recruiting?
The big ones. I mean, we don't have time to go a bunch of, but yes, all the ones that you would think, all the ones I was talking to somebody today that they're going to have like an NIL division. All the big power ones will have it. Right now, Kev, it's as you can understand, how do we do it? I mean, what is this all about? Right now, I got, and I know nothing about it, but I got a call from somebody, one guy in Florida and one guy in Texas, they're starting marketing companies that are going to sign players, and I guess they're going to pay like advertising, hopefully with us at some point, but we've talked about that, to get, because a lot of these guys are going to do social media and what have you, so it's very involved. So what the schools are going to want to do is help the players get attached to the right folks that can help them maximize their name, image, and likeness. So it's going to be a department like everyone else, and the ones that have the biggest incomes, and you know what they are. You don't need me to run them down for you. Those are the ones that are going to do it the best. And if you're not involved initially, if you don't buy into it, David Shaw, I get it, you're going to have to figure out that if you don't do it, you're going to be recruiting up against others that are. Because 5 years from now, when they go in and they're not just telling you about their graduation rate, they're telling you about, oh, by the way, here's the average of what our guys making in name, image, and likeness. See Nick Saban dropping in the to the Texas high school coach. He just dropped it, and then literally he dropped it, and then he dropped it, meaning let that sit there and marinate out there. And it's like in the Pac-12 they're talking about it. Yeah, of course. You know, Kev, you know exactly how this is going. The big time programs are going to be on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, you've like I said, you've known Nick for years.
But by the way, you say a prayer for Kev. He's a big Syracuse fan, so we're big Syracuse fan, big Giant fan. We're pulling for him. We're hoping for him. We keep him in your prayers there.
Well,
thanks, Kev.
if he's a viewer and listener, then
yes,
obviously he's a friend of ours. So definitely we'll do that, Chris. Really appreciate the time, as always.
Thank
whenever
you.
It's great to catch up with you. As we'll come back at you on Thursday, as well as at the end of this week, too. By the time that people listen to the recording that we do on Thursday and the show that we have coming up on Friday, there's going to be a lot of fall camps starting up. So we have that to look forward to as well.
Hey, folks, we're just getting started. Just so thrilled to have Dan here with me. We're going to be breaking down the SEC, as he said, twice a week. And for those of you that follow the other conferences, Kevin, a Syracuse fan, I don't know if you got the word, but right before we do this on Tuesdays, we got the ACC football and beyond. And for those that are watching us on Twitch, we're going to have one for Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12. You know that you sign up for Landry Football's conference call, as Dan has said. And for those of you that want to catch the NFL, sign up for the Falcons channel, the Dirty Birds Nest, and you can get the Scouts Eye on Pro Football, which we'll do tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central right here on this channel.
All right, Chris, catch up with you later on in the week for all of you out there watching on Twitch and all of you out there listening on the Landry Football Podcast channel. I'm Dan Matthews. He's Chris Landry. This has been SEC Football and Beyond. We'll catch up soon. Don't forget to download the Southern Sports Today app. You can listen to this and every show on podcastpark.com or wherever you get your podcast needs.